right. Good to be back. It's been a while. Um, not too long of a while, I'm sure. Anyway, today's topic is going to be on a bunch of veterans fighting political corruption. And I just want to start off by saying, regardless of which political party is involved, all of them are susceptible to corruption. And while this does involve political violence, technically, it was really more of a last resort for these veterans, as we'll see. Every good revolution always starts with some dickhead in power, overstepping boundaries and pissing off the common folk. The dickhead, or rather dickheads in charge for this instance, were two men named Paul Cantrell and Pat Mansfield. But how did they get into power in the first place? Through a political machine, of course. I'm going to do a little bit of a lore dump for some background context, so just bear with me. We're going to get into the juicy battle details soon, I promise. Anyway, so what's a political machine, you might ask? It's a political organization that controls either a city, county, state, or several of the three politically, administratively, or through the passage of laws. The leader or boss for Tennessee's political machine was a Democrat named Edward Hull Crump. Crump had an extensive political career in the state of Tennessee, but this story isn't about him. Just know that he gathered power and influence starting in Memphis, Tennessee, before spreading his control around the state. In 1936, Crump expanded his influence into McMinn County, which is where our battle will take place, by having Democrat Paul Cantrell run for sheriff. This was significant because Crump's machine had a good grip on western Tennessee and was now expanding into eastern Tennessee, where Republicans had the majority control. And I believe also at this time, Republicans really had more of a control of Tennessee in total, but Crump was trying to change that. For those that don't know, each U.S. state has counties, and each of these counties elect a sheriff. Cantrell used the popularity of the successful then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was also a Democrat, to ensure his success at winning the election for sheriff of McMinn County. Cantrell also ran for sheriff in 1938 and 1940, winning both of those times. In 1941, a state law was passed, thanks to Crump's meddling, that basically cut the number of voting districts in the state by half. This was a great win for the Democrats in the state, allowing them to take more positions. Once 1942 came around, however, instead of running for sheriff again, Cantrell had his sights on a higher position. Cantrell ran for state senate and won, not just in 1942, but also in the next election in 1944. So who took over as sheriff of McMinn County while Cantrell became a state senator? One of his sheriff's deputies named, you guessed it, Pat Mansfield. Mansfield would run for sheriff at the 1942 and 1944 elections, winning both. Come 1946, which is the year when the Battle of Athens occurred, Cantrell and Mansfield switched with each other for the upcoming elections. Cantrell once again ran for sheriff of McMinn County, while Mansfield now ran for state senate of Tennessee. Now, if you recall in the beginning of this video, I said that Cantrell and Mansfield were the villains of the story. But all I've really shown you is their political success, which isn't a crime. Or was it? Well, it turns out that Cantrell had committed electoral fraud multiple times in several ways. Things like letting people use their dead relatives to vote for him, stuffing ballot boxes with fake votes for him, or even threatening voters who wouldn't vote for him. If these methods didn't lead to victory, then he had control over the vote count, so victory was kind of inevitable. I don't even know why he tried to fake legitimate votes with all the other stuff. Kind of weird. And our buddy Mansfield also used the same manipulation tactics to win his elections. And of course, political fraud wasn't the only abuse of power these dillweeds partook in. Being sheriff or a deputy has its perks too. At the time, the sheriff and his deputies did not earn a normal salary paycheck afforded to them by the taxpayer. Instead, they got paid through writing fines, booking people, imprisoning them, and the subsequent releases through a kind of fee system. Now, how could something be possibly exploited? Officers would use the system to essentially book or ticket people for just about anything and everything. Whether it was true, made up, or exaggerated, it didn't matter. They were getting their cut at the end of the day. They especially targeted travelers and tourists because they were less likely to try to fight any legal issue or cause problems. The majority would just pay their dues and complain and be on their way. One of the more lucrative strategies was to pull over buses passing through town. A sheriff's deputy would go walking up and down the aisles of the bus and essentially writing out BS tickets to the passengers. Now, you look drunk, drunkenness ticket. It was quite literally highway robbery. And apparently, in the span of about 10 years, the McMinn Sheriff's Department collected over $300,000 in fees, which was a whole lot for a bunch of dudes living out in rural Tennessee. And if we adjust for inflation, that's around almost $5 million. But how could somebody that's an officer of the law be okay with doing such things? Probably because they were all ex felons. You see, from the beginnings of 1942 until the end of 1945, there was kind of this tiny little war going on called World War II. And during that time, all or majority of the able-bodied men were off in Europe or fighting in the Pacific. This left a lot of vacancies in many jobs, including law enforcement. So what did the totally cool and in no way corrupt Cantrell do? He hired ex-criminals as deputies that were completely loyal to him and had no problem shaking down people for money. With their loyalty, Cantrell was totally in control of law enforcement in the county, and that influence ended up spreading to local school districts, local newspapers. Essentially, everybody wanted to be loyal to Cantrell and ensure that they stay in their positions and don't get harassed by the deputies. It got so bad that as a citizen of McMinn County, you couldn't work anywhere important or do anything important without the say-so of Cantrell or Mansfield. By the end of 1945, McMinn County was like a mini dictatorship. Not something all the returning soldiers were looking forward to, considering they just fought dictators overseas. Come the end of the war, there were several thousand returning soldiers to McMinn County. However, they were a little bit uneasy about what they were going to come back to. Their relatives had been sending them letters and discussing things about the corruption going on in the county. Apparently, one of those things included a story where Cantrell's supporters killed two military men that were on leave back in the county while the war was still going on. Couple that with the other illegal happenings, the election fraud. A lot of the GIs were really itching to change things when they got back. Nothing like stopping tyranny overseas only for it to be in your backyard, am I right? And you remember how the deputies were earning their money? Well, plenty of the GIs that were returning were getting their discharge pay. When they came home, they were ripe for the picking. This further escalated things. So what did the veterans end up doing? They decided to do things by the book and pick their own candidates to run against the corrupt officials. The GIs got a campaign manager named Jim Buttram, and they even got the Republican Party chairman at the time, Otto Kennedy, as an advisor to help them. They did this by holding a meeting in May of 1946, several months before elections. And during this meeting, they had plenty of discussions and looked at the demographics of the county. And the vets ended up picking 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats to run in various positions because they felt that that was fair representation of the people that lived in the county. It's nice to see them try to do everything nicely and fairly and discuss things like decent human beings instead of immediately resulting to violence. Granted, we're going to get there. The GI's political movement received a whole lot of donations from the communities that wanted to finally end all this open corruption. This included citizens of Athens and all the other towns located in McMinn County. Donations came from businesses and private citizens. Granted, certain people didn't want to donate openly because they were afraid of retribution. The vets even ran on a political slogan: your vote will be counted as cast. Because again, with all that electoral fraud, it didn't really matter if you voted for the people they wanted you to vote for, they were just going to fake the ballots anyway. However, despite having overwhelming support and financial backing, several people were skeptical of the success that the veterans candidates would have, again because of all the voter fraud being committed. However, the GIs had a plan for this. One veteran of the Pacific Campaign, named Bill White, organized a group of 30 men, calling themselves the Fighting Bunch. The GIs planned to watch over the polling locations and ensure everything was done legally, and with 30 men, it was more than enough manpower for the 12 polling locations. And of course, the sheriff at that time, Mansfield, was going to have his deputy stationed at these polling places to ensure order, or rather to ensure that people are voting for the right people. Some of these poll watching veterans had brought their own firearms, and for those who didn't have a firearm when they returned, White used some of his discharge pay to acquire some pistols for them. Sheriff Mansfield probably had some concerns about how organized and put together the GIs were, and to prepare for the elections, he amassed some 200 plus deputies to watch over the various polling locations. And a lot of these were temporary hires, most of them out of state, and probably also ex felons, let's be honest. Mansfield typically only had about 15 deputies for the county as a whole being employed. Things were starting to gear up to a inevitable conflict. County elections began on August 1st, 1946 at around 9 a.m. In Athens, GI election judge Walter Ellis protested issues with how the election was being handled right from the start at his polling location. He was then arrested by a deputy and taken to the McMinn County Jail for his protests. The sheriff's office quickly replaced the GI with a man named Fred West, which caused issues with the voters and the GIs, as West was no doubt a puppet of Sheriff Mansfield. Later in the day, at the Waterworks polling location, a man named Tom Gillespie, an African American farmer, had gone to cast his vote, and apparently as he went to vote, a sheriff's deputy named Nell stood behind him, seeing who he was voting for. Gillespie was obviously voting against Cantrell and his allies, which to the deputies was the wrong choice to make. Apparently, Deputy Nell stopped Gillespie from voting and told him that he was voting in the wrong polling place and he had to leave. Gillespie told him and another sheriff's deputy named Wise, who wasn't very wise, that he always voted at the Waterworks location. A GI poll watcher joined in arguing for Gillespie. That's when Deputy Wise punched Gillespie with some brass knuckles, and Gillespie, being an older man, posing no threat at all, decided, maybe I should leave. And as Gillespie hightailed it out of there, Deputy Wise pulled out his gun and shot the fleeing man. Why? Probably because he was a dickhead, and maybe also a racist. It was the 1940s after all. News of the injustice spread to the GIs quickly. Many of them wanted to take drastic action, but the others wanted to try to keep things legal. Not that it was really working all that well thus far. The GI campaign manager, Buttram, sent a telegram to the then Tennessee governor, Jim McCord, and to the U.S. Attorney General, Tom Clark, hoping they would offer some kind of assistance in helping keep the election fair. But they never got a response. Not surprised, honestly. While some of the GIs were figuring out what to do next, Sheriff Mansfield arrived at the Waterworks polling location to shut it down early and to take the ballot boxes with him. This is obviously very problematic. The on-duty poll watchers, Charles Scott and Ed Vestal, took issue with this, but when they voiced their displeasure, they were taken hostage by Deputy Nell and Wise. However, Scott and Vestal were able to escape after some kind of distraction or commotion. Accounts vary. What everyone can agree on, however, is that when the two escaped the deputies, gunfire followed, and the crowd of people outside the polling place ran for cover, ducking for safety. Deputy Chief Bo Dunn and Deputy Wisenell took the ballot boxes with the sheriff to McMinn County Jail. While this was all happening, not far from the Waterworks polling place was the 12th precinct. Here, they had their own issues. GI poll watchers Bob Harrell and Leslie Dooley were there with Deputy Wilburn. While everything was going on, according to eyewitnesses, Deputy Wilburn was letting a woman vote for Cantrell. The only problem? She was apparently not registered to vote, and when G.I. Harrell stopped her before she could vote, Deputy Wilburn took this as a threat and beat Harrell so bad he had to be hospitalized. Like with the other poll place, this one ended up getting closed down, and the ballot boxes were taken to the McMinn County Jail, and G.I. Dooley ended up getting taken as a hostage. The people, fed up with the corrupt antics of the deputies, decided to regroup at a Sankey garage with their firearms, where several of the GIs were already gathered. 7 deputies would be sent out by Sheriff Mansfield to arrest poll watchers Scott and Vestal from the Waterworks polling location. However, all 7 were stopped and taken prisoner by the GIs. Bill White and several GIs would end up taking the 7 deputies into the woods where they would strip them, tie them up, and beat them. Fortunately for them, the GIs wanted to punish them, not kill them. I'm sure they learned a valuable lesson that day. Also, I believe the GIs kind of left them tied up in the woods. They were helped out later, but, kind of humiliating to be ass naked, bruised and beaten, kind of tied to a tree. Kind of funny if you think about it. Anyway, Bill White and his band of GIs did not stop there. They would also raid the nearby National Guard armory to arm themselves and the rest of the GIs. A couple of pistols and rifles weren't enough. They needed more firepower because they knew where things were going. They had some 60-plus men ready to fight for a fair election. By the time the GIs were getting ready for a fight, the day was ending, all the polling locations had been closed by this point, and counting had started. It was clear that the GIs were in the lead, but there was a major issue. 3 of the ballot boxes were in the McMinn County Jail, taken by Mansfield's men, along with some of their detained GI friends. The 3 boxes alone couldn't hold enough votes for the GIs to lose. However, in the jail there were 2 very important men. There was Mansfield and a member of the McMinn County Election Commission named George Woods. These 2 had the power to certify an election and could do so in their favor, regardless of what the votes said. Cantrell and about 50 deputies were also present at the jail. The GIs knew they had to do something soon before the election could be stolen. That and more Cantrell police support would most likely arrive by the morning, so it was kind of a now or never kind of deal. At this point, it was around 9 p.m. in the evening. Bill White and his fighting bunch were going to descend upon the jail and demand the ballot boxes. Bill was expecting a fight, so he sent half his men to the bank across from the jail to post up on the second floor and be ready, while Bill and the other half of the men went to the post office to prep. Bill and the rest would approach the jail, but found it to be locked down tight with several deputies outside and inside. You had several hundred GIs versus about 50 deputies. Bill approached and demanded the ballot boxes, but he was refused. Prior to this, Bill told his men that if they were refused the ballot boxes, then they would have to escalate, and Bill was a man of his word. He, self-admittedly, was the first person to fire, and when he did, his men joined in. Now, the battle details at this point are a bit murky. Reports say thousands of rounds were fired, fistfights ensued, deputies were running for cover in the jail or just abandoning the jail in general. Apparently, multiple deputies were also shot, and apparently a request for reinforcements was actually made during the battle from neighboring Polk County, but they refused as they didn't want to get caught up in all the violence. During the fight, an ambulance arrived, so the GIs, being decent individuals, decided to stop shooting, thinking that the ambulance was there to take the wounded out of there. GIs, at the end of the day, were not looking to kill anybody, they just wanted a fair election. When the shooting stopped, two men exited the jail, entered the ambulance, and it sped off, to the confusion of the GIs. Later on, we'd find that the two people that got out of the jail and bailed was Cantrell and Sheriff Mansfield. Yeah, those two, not only are they corrupt douches, but they're also cowards. I'm honestly surprised that the rest of the deputies didn't just give up right then and there. Reinforcements for Cantrell were most likely going to arrive in the morning, with rumors of the Coast Guard being deployed spreading amongst the men. Bill would give the deputies multiple chances to surrender, but they held their ground. The GIs had to change tactics since shooting and negotiating wasn't working. First, they tried firebombing the jail with Molotov cocktails, but they were unable to get close enough due to the returning fire from deputies. So the GIs resorted to using dynamite. They tied a few sticks together, lit them, and threw them. While the dynamite could go farther than the Molotov cocktails, they still could not reach the jail. However, the dynamite did blow up some of the police cars, flipping them. Bill wanted still to hit the jail, so several more sticks of dynamite were tied, and using cover from the carnage of the flipped vehicles, Bill managed to get close enough to plant 3 bombs that blew almost at the same time. This time, the bombs were successful in breaching the jail walls. With this final barrage, the battle was over. With the jail walls breached, the deputies finally surrendered. The battle had lasted several hours, and it was about 3:30 a.m. when everything was said and done. A little fun fact about the battle. While the GIs and the deputies were exchanging blows, the townspeople of Athens joined in their own way by vandalizing the cars that belonged to the deputies. How did they know which cars belonged to the deputies? Well, since a lot of them were temporary hires from out of state, a lot of them had out of state license plates. Very easy to identify. A lot of these cars had their windows smashed in, or the cars were just flipped over in general. Imagine surviving this big battle, thinking to yourself this wasn't worth all the trouble and pay. You just want to get out of town, get back to your house, and you come out to find your car's been flipped over or smashed in by the locals. And some of you are probably wondering, where was the local police force, right? Because these are all sheriff's deputies for the county. What about the Athens Police Department? Well, apparently they all kind of just bailed, not wanting to get involved in the ensuing carnage. But anyway, after the battle was all said and done and the ballot boxes were recovered and everything was counted properly, it turns out to no one's surprise the GIs had won all the positions they were going for. In the days following, the results were certified and the GI candidates took their positions. And it continued like this for some time, but eventually things went back to just Democrats versus Republicans, and the GI movement kind of faded away. And that concludes the Battle of Athens, Tennessee. A bit more of a serious topic, especially with recent events, which totally didn't plan this in any way. I've had this on the list of things to cover for over a year now, specifically. Just took a while to get this all done. A whole lot of different issues. Recording setup has changed. But I think moving forward, I'm going to avoid the more serious topics and just try to focus more on the paranormal, the extraterrestrial, the cryptid, that kind of stuff. Mysteries as well. Just because I think they're a little bit more fun. Covering the stories of whatever's going on, giving you the facts, my own thoughts and opinions. And yeah, I think it overall just be more enjoying. But anyway, until next time, I think we're going to be covering a ghost ship.